Welcome to another session of Informally Formal. We are very excited to bring you today a topic that is of great importance: real estate, housing, and construction. And to talk about this very important subject for the economy, we have someone equally important, a four-time president, and I might mention that the youngest president ever elected to Dhaka Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and the managing director of Anwar Group of Industries, a household name in Bangladesh, Mr. Hossain Khaled. Welcome to the show, Khaled.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you so very much for making the time. It's indeed a pleasure for us. And I'll go straight into our very first question, which is, tell us the importance of real estate, housing, and construction in an economy that is 70% domestic, as you know, Khaled, and the role that this sector plays in that economy. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Anwar. You have rightly nailed it that, even though Bangladesh, whenever we are referred to in the global market, we are always spoken of because of our exports and because of our, especially of our success factors in the textile and garments industry. But just like most other economies, I think Bangladesh also depends heavily on its domestic industries and domestic economy, if I may say. And of which, of course, just like most other economies, housing is a very important component of the domestic economy as well. According to BBS, Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, 53% of housing is still informal housing, which in Bangla is called kacha housing. 53%.
Wow.
31% is semi-pakka, which is half, how would you define it? Half formal.
Half prominent.
Absolutely, half prominent. And then 10%, as a matter of fact, the rest, 20% is housing, which is buildings that are below 5-story and buildings that are above 5 stories. So that's the total of 20%. So all these developments that we see in urban settings, especially in Dhaka, Chittagong, and all the urban cities that we usually travel to, actually represents only 20% of the total housing industry. And again, according to BBS, in 2016, the contribution of housing and real estate industry, excluding construction by itself is $1 billion industry even in Bangladesh, but housing itself contributed 1.5 trillion taka, which is equivalent to 8% to the GDP directly. And when I say directly, obviously there is also an indirect contribution, which in total contributes to about 12 to 13% to the GDP. There's about 260 industries that are directly involved in housing and real estate, and 300 plus industries that are indirectly involved. Now, I did mention about the statistics or the data of 2016, and that was a reason, because I wanted to bring you to date that in 2019, this contribution has gone up to 2.1 trillion taka, which now entails about 12% directly and about 15 to 16% indirectly. For housing, we actually have a scarcity of resources. When I talk about resource, it's first thing is land. Because of that scarcity of resource, or of course being land becomes extremely expensive.
As you pointed out, that 12 to 15% of the GDP, that is definitely a very important segment. Let's talk about opportunities, I guess, if you would. First, and then of course the challenges that is faced by this industry as you see it, please.
Well, I think I already started with the challenges. Number one is the availability of land. Because of the size of the lands being so small, costs become very high. The second challenge that we as developers always face, as a matter of fact, from both ends, from customers and as well as from developers end, is the financing costs. One thing that we have to also discuss when I talk about finance is, the refinancing strategies available globally for home owners, which unfortunately is not available in Bangladesh. So if we can actually help consumers benefit with low cost interest, they will be able to, a lot of these present home dwellers who are renting at the present moment will be able to actually afford to buy a house, or at least an apartment, at least a condo. That by itself, you know, grows the economy by multiple and multiples of times. Third, more important challenge that we face is that unlike even our neighbor, even India, forget about the rest of the world, even in India, the term for home loan is minimum of 20 to 25 years. Whereas in Bangladesh, it's 8 to 10 years, the ceiling being 10. So obviously, in a country where your land is expensive, your costs are high, and then your repayment term is also low, so it becomes an additional burden on whoever is investing. So that also needs to be taken to at least a 25 to 30 year period.
If you look at the world in general, but let's just say North America, its housing loans are tied to the 30-year bond. Now, one of the challenges that we have in Bangladesh is that our capital markets haven't really evolved to the extent that the economy has moved forward, in particular the bond market. So what happens really is when it is tied to a 30-year bond, those by nature then are more stable and are in most cases are instruments of the sovereign government itself. So now in Bangladesh, we have House Building Finance Corporation, I believe there is one institution. You also mentioned about a program where there is mostly rural refinancing facilities available. So
it's called Housing Fund.
Right. So now, would you as a suggestion, could we consider in Bangladesh for the government to have a housing bond, so to speak? A housing
Absolutely.
bond.
I was
maybe a 30-year housing bond.
Absolutely. I think you've already nailed the coffin. This was something that we have been discussing, and I was going to bring that up later at the discussion, but you have absolutely nailed it. A bond at this present time would be a very beneficial one. And not only that, we could also, in order to reduce costs, we could also float housing bonds outside of Bangladesh.
Especially when in the Western world, returns are hovering around 0%. Or in savings, barely 1 to 2%. So,
absolutely.
If you can have some kind of a government guarantee mechanism in terms of a government bond guarantee mechanism, we could bring in funds for, let's say, 4 or 5%. Then it would
absolutely. And we see, the thing is, in that perspective, we gain half, they gain double.
Exactly. Absolutely right. The bond market, as you know, is, especially in America, there are the short-term treasuries, and then the 1 year, and then 5 year, and then you have the 10-year and 30-year bonds. Real estate, obviously, depends on the type of financing you do. If it's a variable financing, then it can be an adjustable rate, what is called an ARM, adjustable rate mortgage. But there is still that option available where you can get a 30-year mortgage. You can get a 30-year mortgage, you can get a 20-year mortgage, 15-year mortgage. So basically two kinds. One is adjustable and the other one is fixed rate. So nevertheless, all of these instruments, we don't have to, Khaled, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Many of these things we can just take and these
adapt.
These are already proven strategies that would open up the market. The other thing I wanted to
Absolutely.
mention to you is this, that in an economy like Bangladesh, there is a tremendous amount of money that's locked up in equity, housing equity. Now, as you know, in Western world countries, that equity is released into the marketplace, and then it has the ripple effect. If we could find a mechanism, and that could be very well through these bonds that we are talking about, if it could be released into the economy, then that could be used in what we call faster multiplication of money, because if that liquidity is released into the marketplace. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, that's a food for thought. I'm like, I really haven't thought of that before, but it's definitely something that needs to be discussed and formulated. And most importantly, our policymakers, if they are a lot more receptive to new ideas, I think these are the things that they need to explore.
Absolutely.
And you have right. I'm like, I have from the very beginning, I've said that you have rightly nailed the coffin already. You've given suggestions that we have not discussed in the past.
Right. Khaled, what would you, now we came up with some very good points here in today's discussion. Land is not much we can do about it. Land is what we have, but we can definitely work on the financing end of things to make it a lot easier in terms of affordability for most of the people out there, because this interest rate is rather burdensome for most people. Khaled, let me now switch gears real quickly and ask you, for the protection of consumers, what kind of regulatory mechanism do you find in Bangladesh that is specifically for the protection of consumers?
It's the contract and the enforcement of the contract.
Khaled, my question was more related to government oversight.
Over the years, government, different, there's a lot of ministries and a lot of agencies who monitor and control these constructions. It can be fire, it can be environment, it can be water, it can be electricity, and then there's housing and building. There has been a lot of automation in approving authorities, but that needs to be actually automated a lot more.
Just to wrap it up, Khaled, so I think something significant could come out of this discussion. Hopefully, we can make certain suggestions, which first and foremost is the financing aspect of it. We urge the government really to look into a bond mechanism whereby the rates are affordable and longer term. So now imagine if you were mentioning 14%, if that rate could be 7%, and the term from 8 to 10 years could go to 30 years, affordability is going to multiply by
even 20 years, even if it's just doubled.
Yeah. So affordability right there is going to multiply by several folds.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that's going to open up the market significantly. The second, equally important, of course, what you mentioned is the overall time that it takes for the different agencies to come together to make a real estate project happen. That needs to be looked into, because that all costs money. Would that be correct, Khaled?
Absolutely. And if I can just supplement to your points, is that the shift in mindset of the policymakers towards Bangladesh Inc. As Dhaka Chamber's motto, the best of Bangladesh is business. If we can have that mindset, I'm like, everything changes.
So I guess that brings us pretty much to the end of our session. It was very interesting because like you mentioned at the very onset, Khaled, that housing is everyone's dream. Everyone wants a roof over their head. So, and it is a significant portion of any economy, as it is in Bangladesh. So some of these reforms we ought to look at, so everyone can one day have their own home that they call, right?
Absolutely.
Khaled, I thank you so very much for joining us today. And I thank our audience for joining us. And with an invitation to join us again next week, I sign off right here. Have a good day and be safe. Bye-bye.